A lost fox begs to enter his cabin, but what it reveals leaves him in tears. The snowstorm arrived like a beast from the north, swallowing the landscape in a thick white blanket. Winds howled through the valley, shaking the trees and rattling the windows of a small wooden cabin nestled deep in the Alaskan wilderness. Inside, Daniel Whitmore, a retired journalist, sat by the fire, staring at the flickering flames with empty eyes. Daniel had lived in this cabin for nearly 10 years. He told himself he liked solitude, that he didn't need the outside world. But the truth was, he was running from memories, from grief, from the ghost of a life he once had. His wife Eleanor had passed away 5 years ago. The day she was gone, so was the world he knew. Cities, people, conversations, they all became noise he didn't want to hear. So he packed his bags and left for the wilderness, where silence was his only companion. Tonight, however, even the silence was uneasy. The blizzard outside was stronger than any storm he had seen in years. Snow pounded against the wooden walls of his cabin, and the wind howled like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Daniel sighed, closing the book in his lap. He had been trying to read, but the words blurred together. He wasn't sure if it was the firelight or his own tired mind. Leaning back in his chair, he ran a hand through his gray beard, listening to the storm outside. Then it happened. A sound, faint but sharp. Daniel frowned. At first, he thought it was just the wind. Storms had a way of making strange noises. But then it came again. Scratch, scratch. It was coming from the door. Daniel sat up straight, his pulse quickening. He wasn't expecting visitors. Nobody came this far into the wilderness, especially not in the middle of a blizzard. His nearest neighbor was over 10 miles away, and he hadn't spoken to them in months. Then a second noise, a soft, desperate cry, a whimper. Daniel's heart pounded. It sounded like an animal. He hesitated, his mind racing. A wolf? No, wolves didn't scratch at doors. A stray dog? Maybe, but there were no pets around here. Scratch, scratch. The sound grew more urgent. Whatever it was freezing out there. Daniel grabbed the old hunting rifle from the corner of the room, not because he planned to use it, but because he felt safer holding it. Slowly, he stepped toward the door. His fingers hovered over the latch. The storm roared outside, shaking the cabin as if demanding he open the door. A bitter wind crept through the cracks, making him shiver. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the door open. The wind screamed in his face, a violent gust of ice and snow rushing inside. He squinted against the whiteout, barely able to see a few feet ahead. But then, through the blur of snow, he saw it. A small shape, curled up on his porch. At first it didn't move. It was just a lump of fur covered in snow, blending into the storm. Then it lifted its head. Two piercing blue eyes stared up at him. It was a fox. An Arctic fox, no larger than a small dog. Its fur was tangled with ice, its body trembling violently. It looked half frozen, its breath coming in weak, shallow puffs. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the fox let out a tiny whimper, its eyes pleading. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. He had spent years shutting the world out, refusing to let anything or anyone close. But standing in the doorway, staring at this helpless creature, something cracked inside him. "Aw, hell," he muttered under his breath. He reached down and scooped up the fox, pulling it inside. The moment the door shut, the cabin felt silent again. The storm locked outside. Daniel placed the fox gently on the floor by the fire. It didn't move at first, still shivering, its breath shaky. He grabbed an old towel and carefully dried its fur, rubbing warmth into its body. The fox blinked up at him, its blue eyes locked onto his as if studying him. Daniel shook his head. "You're lucky I opened that door, little guy," he murmured. He had no idea why he was talking to a fox. Maybe it was because it had been too long since he had spoken to anyone at all. He reached for a metal bowl and poured some warm water into it, placing it near the fox. "Drink," he said, though he wasn't sure if the animal understood him. It did. The fox leaned forward, lapping at the water with tiny, delicate sips. Daniel watched, a strange warmth spreading through him. He had no idea where this fox had come from. Wild animals usually didn't seek out humans. And yet this one had found its way to his door in the middle of the worst blizzard in years. Something about that didn't feel like an accident. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something other than emptiness, a strange sense of curiosity, a feeling he thought he had lost years ago.
The cabin was warmer now, though the storm outside still raged like an angry beast. The wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside, the crackling fire gave off a golden glow, casting soft flickers across the wooden walls. Daniel sat in his old armchair, his gaze fixed on the small fox curled up by the fire. It was still trembling, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The snow and ice had melted from its fur, leaving behind damp patches. He had no idea what to do with it. He had never taken care of an animal before, not even a dog. His wife, Eleanor, had always wanted a pet, but he had refused. Too much responsibility, he had told her. We traveled too much. But that wasn't true anymore. He didn't travel. He didn't go anywhere. His life was this cabin, this fire, and the silence. And now, this fox. Daniel sighed, leaning forward. You're lucky you're still breathing, little guy. The fox flicked its ear, its blue eyes barely open. Daniel hesitated, then reached out carefully. His fingers brushed against its soft fur, and the fox flinched, but didn't pull away. It was so small, so fragile. For a moment, Daniel felt something stir inside him, a memory. Eleanor's voice. You can't shut out the world forever, Daniel. He swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. Right now, this animal needed food. Standing up, he shuffled toward the small kitchen area of his cabin. He didn't keep much, just enough for himself. Canned soup, dried meat, old bread. Nothing a fox would want. He opened the fridge, pulling out a half-eaten piece of roasted chicken from 2 nights ago. That would do. As he tore the meat into smaller pieces, he felt eyes on him. Turning, he saw the fox watching from its spot by the fire. You hungry? Daniel muttered. He crouched and placed the chicken in front of it. The fox hesitated. Then, with a small twitch of its nose, it leaned forward and sniffed the meat before carefully taking a bite. Daniel watched as it chewed, its tiny jaws working through the food. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until he let it out. For some reason, the sight made his chest feel tight. When the fox finished eating, it licked its nose and curled back into a ball. Daniel exhaled. All right, he said, more to himself than the fox. You stay the night, but don't get too comfortable. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, the fox didn't leave. At first, Daniel thought it would try to escape, scratching at the door like it had before. But it didn't. It stayed inside, moving only to eat, drink, or curl up by the fire. And Daniel got used to it. At first, he ignored it. He went about his usual routine, chopping wood, brewing coffee, reading old books. But something felt different. The silence of his cabin, which had once felt comforting, now felt strange. For the first time in years, there was another living thing inside his home. At night, as he sat by the fire, he found himself watching the fox instead of reading. It had recovered quickly, its shivering stopped, and its coat fluffed up, making it look healthier. And then, on the 4th night, something odd happened. Daniel woke up in the middle of the night. At first, he didn't know why. The fire had burned low, casting only faint embers. The wind had settled into a quiet whisper. Then he realized the fox was gone. Daniel frowned, sitting up. His cabin wasn't big, there weren't many places to hide. He checked under the table, behind the chair near the kitchen. Nothing. Had it left? But the door was still locked. Then, just as he was about to give up, he saw it. The fox was sitting on the windowsill, staring outside. But there was something off. Its ears were twitching. Its body was tense, as if listening. Daniel slowly walked toward it, glancing out the window. At first, he saw nothing. Just snow, stretching out endlessly under the moonlight. Then he saw them. Footprints, leading from the forest to his cabin. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. There were no people for miles. Who would be out here in the dead of night? The fox let out a low, soft whimper. Daniel's pulse raced. He grabbed his rifle from the corner of the room and slowly unlocked the door, stepping outside. Cold hit him like a knife, but he barely felt it. The footprints were fresh, not from an animal. Too big, too deep. A human. He swallowed hard, following them. The tracks led toward the edge of the trees. But then, they stopped, vanished. Daniel's chest tightened. No more footprints, no sign of where they had gone. It was as if whoever had made them had simply disappeared. A sudden gust of wind blew snow into his face, making him shiver. Something about this didn't feel right. He turned back toward the cabin, his mind spinning. When he stepped inside, the fox was still sitting at the window, its blue eyes locked onto him, almost as if it knew exactly what he had seen. The next morning, Daniel sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The footprints haunted him. He had checked again at sunrise, but they were already covered by fresh snow. Had it been his imagination? No. He had seen them, clear as day. Something was out there. He glanced at the fox, which was now curled up on the rug, its tail wrapped around itself. "You knew, didn't you?" he muttered. The fox didn't move. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "You need a name." He thought for a moment, staring at the fox's silver-white fur. That's what it was, a quiet presence in the snow, a whisper of something deeper. "Echo," he said aloud. The fox's ear twitched. Daniel let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. But he had a feeling this was only the beginning. Something was waiting for him, and Echo had led it straight to his door. The morning after Daniel saw the footprints, something inside him shifted. For years, he had lived in isolation, content with his routine. But now, there was a mystery at his doorstep, something he couldn't ignore. He sat at the table, staring into his coffee, his mind replaying the moment over and over. Footprints, leading to his cabin, then vanishing. Daniel wasn't a fool. He had spent years as a journalist, uncovering stories, finding patterns in the details people ignored. And his gut was telling him something wasn't right. Echo sat on the rug, licking its paw as if nothing had changed. But Daniel knew better. "You knew something was out there, didn't you?" he muttered. The fox paused, its ears twitching. It lifted its head and stared at him, those piercing blue eyes too intelligent for a wild animal. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Great, now I'm talking to a fox." Echo blinked. Then, without warning, it stood up and trotted to the door. Daniel frowned. "What?" The fox turned its head, looking at him. Then it scratched at the door. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The storm had passed. Outside, the world was quiet. Too quiet. The snow-covered trees stood like frozen sentinels, untouched by wind. And yet something about the air felt off. Echo scratched the door again, more urgently this time. Daniel hesitated. His logical side told him to ignore it. Stay inside. Forget about it. But the other part of him, the part that had once chased stories across the world, the part that had refused to let mysteries go unsolved, was whispering to him now. Go. With a deep breath, he grabbed his coat and boots. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, not because he wanted to use it, but because something about this situation made him uneasy. Then he opened the door. The cold hit him immediately, but he ignored it. Echo leaped forward, landing in the deep snow before turning back, as if checking to make sure Daniel was following. Daniel sighed. "You better not be leading me to my death." The fox didn't wait. It trotted forward, weaving through the trees with surprising ease. Daniel followed. The snow was deep, making each step difficult. But Echo moved like it had done this before, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Minutes passed. The only sound was the crunch of Daniel's boots and the distant creak of ice-laden branches. Then, Daniel saw it. Cabin, not his, a different one. It was small, barely visible between the thick trees, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. The windows were coated in frost, making it impossible to see inside. Daniel's pulse quickened. This wasn't a place he had ever seen before. And yet, something about it felt familiar. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct told him to turn back, but then Echo let out a soft whimper. Daniel looked down. The fox was standing at the door, its blue eyes locked onto him, waiting. Daniel swallowed hard, then stepped forward. The door was slightly open. The wood was warped as if it hadn't been used in years. Snow had piled up in the doorway, untouched by footprints. Slowly, Daniel pushed the door open. The inside was dark, dusty, empty, or so he thought, because then his eyes landed on something resting on the wooden table in the center of the room. A book. No, not just a book, a journal. And on the cover, written in faded ink, Eleanor Whitmore. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His wife's name. His knees nearly buckled. What the hell? His hands were shaking as he reached for the journal, his fingers brushing against the worn leather. This wasn't possible. Eleanor had never been here. And yet, here was her journal, sitting untouched in a cabin he had never seen before. For a long moment, Daniel just stared. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor's handwriting. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He turned the pages, scanning the words. At first, it was nothing strange, just her usual notes, thoughts about the places she had visited. But then, as he flipped further, something changed. The entries became different. I dreamed of the fox again last night, the one with the blue eyes. Daniel's hands tightened around the journal. It watches me, guides me. I don't know why, but I feel like it's leading me somewhere, to something I've forgotten. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. He turned another page. The snow is deeper today. The fox came again, standing outside the window. It feels familiar. I feel like I've seen it before, a long time ago, but I can't remember where. Daniel felt lightheaded. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Eleanor had died 5 years ago. She had never mentioned anything about this place, and yet here was her writing, and here was Echo, watching him, just like it had watched her. Daniel slowly closed the journal, his mind spinning. What did this mean? Had Eleanor been here before? Had she written this before she died, or was there another explanation? His gaze fell to Echo. The fox sat perfectly still, those icy blue eyes locked onto him. It had brought him here. It had led him to this journal. Daniel took a slow, shaky breath. For the first time in years, he felt something stir deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long, long time. Hope, but also fear. Because whatever this meant, it wasn't over yet. Daniel stood in the dim light of the forgotten cabin, the weight of Eleanor's journal pressing down on his hands like a lead weight. The room was silent, except for the faint crackling of the cold wind sneaking through the wooden walls. His heart pounded. How was this possible? Eleanor had never spoken of this place. He had known her better than anyone, hadn't he? And yet, here it was. Her handwriting, her thoughts, her words, written in a place he had never even known existed. Daniel turned the pages, skimming through the last entries. His breath hitched as he read the final words written in her delicate script. I feel like I'm close to something important. The fox keeps returning, watching, waiting. I don't know what it wants, but I feel like I should follow. Daniel looked down at Echo. The fox sat still, watching him, as if waiting for a reaction. For a moment, Daniel thought he might be dreaming. Maybe the isolation had finally broken him, sending him into some strange hallucination where ghosts left journals and foxes carried messages from the dead. But the cold air in his lungs was real. The snow under his boots was real. And Echo was real too. Daniel swallowed hard, gripping the journal. She was here, he whispered. The fox blinked slowly. Daniel exhaled shakily, his mind spinning. Eleanor had been here. Maybe not recently, but at some point in her life, she had walked through this very door. And whatever had brought her here back then, the fox, the footprints, the strange pull of something beyond logic, it had now brought him here too. Why? Daniel's grip tightened on the book. What were you looking for, Eleanor? His own voice sounded strange in the empty cabin. And then, Echo stood up. The fox didn't make a sound, didn't scratch or whimper. It just moved, trotting toward the door and slipping outside into the snow. Daniel hesitated. He knew what this was, a choice. He could walk away, leave the journal here, shut the door and pretend none of this had ever happened. Or he could follow. For the first time in years, something inside him told him he already knew the answer. Daniel exhaled and stepped forward, following Echo into the snow. Echo led him through the woods, its small paws barely making a sound in the fresh snow. Daniel followed in silence, his breath visible in the cold air. His boots crunched against the ground, but otherwise the forest was eerily still. It was strange. He had lived here for years, but as they walked, the trees seemed different. As if the landscape itself was shifting, revealing things he had never noticed before. Or maybe he had just never looked. The path twisted and turned deeper into the trees until finally they came to a clearing. Daniel froze. In the middle of the snow-covered field stood an old wooden bench, and next to it, a tree. a single tall birch tree with its white bark peeling slightly at the edges. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Memories crashed into him all at once. This place, he knew this place, not from his time here in the wilderness. No, from before. From years ago, decades ago. He could almost hear Eleanor's laughter, see the way her scarf whipped in the wind as she spun in circles, arms stretched toward the sky. "You always say you hate the cold, Daniel," she had teased, "but look how beautiful it is." He had been here before, with her. The realization nearly knocked the air out of his lungs. His legs felt heavy as he stepped toward the tree, as if he were moving through time itself. And then he saw it. A small tin box half buried at the base of the tree. His breath caught. With shaky hands, he knelt and brushed the snow away, his fingers numb as they pried open the rusted lid. Inside, wrapped in delicate parchment, was an old letter. Daniel's heart pounded as he carefully unfolded the paper. Eleanor's handwriting, again. But this time, the words were meant for him. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you found your way here. Somehow, some way, life brought you back. Maybe it was the fox, maybe it was the snow, or maybe it was just time. I came here once, years before I met you. I don't know why, but I always felt like I was meant to find this place. And when I did, I felt something I had never felt before, peace. Like I had finally stopped running from something I didn't even know I was running from. You always said I believed in things you couldn't see, that I chased the impossible, and maybe I did. But I think some things are meant to find us, even when we're not looking. If you're here, Daniel, then I need you to do something for me. Stop running. Come home. You have spent too many years locking yourself away. I don't want that for you. I never did. I wanted you to live, to keep chasing the world, to find new stories, and most of all, to let yourself love again. I'm not coming back, Daniel, but you still have time. Don't waste it. With love, always, Eleanor." Daniel's hands trembled. The wind whispered through the trees, but he couldn't feel the cold anymore. His vision blurred. He wasn't sure when the tears started. He only knew that they wouldn't stop. For years, he had been searching for something. He just hadn't known what. And now, standing in the snow, Eleanor's words in his hands, he finally understood. This wasn't about the fox, or the footprints, or the cabin. It was about him, about letting go. For the first time in 5 years, Daniel closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and let the past rest. When he finally looked up, Echo was sitting a few feet away, watching him. Daniel smiled through his tears. "Thank you," he whispered. The fox blinked. Then, as softly as the snow fell from the trees, Echo turned and trotted away. Daniel didn't call it back. For the first time in years, he didn't need to. Instead, he turned toward the path, the one leading home, and he started walking.